I hope you've all had some coffee, had a chance to get some breakfast. It's the third day here. It feels like the 30th day, but it's the third day here at the General Assembly. And I want to thank you all for joining at Devex Impact House for our last day. I'm Alan Robbins. I'm co-founder and executive vice president of Devex. And I'm really pleased to be hosting this conversation today on empowering nonprofits with digital transformation, unlocking opportunities for all. And I want to thank our partners from ServiceNow for putting this event on with us. We've got a great set of programming today after this as well, in this topic of philanthropy, technology, AI. We're going to continue with a lot of this other programming as the day continues. And I think it's such an important topic as we start to, it's been a fire hose of information the last couple of days. And I think we're at the time period now where maybe we can start sort of looking back and start collating all of that information and figuring out what to do with it. And how to make nonprofits more effective is truly one of those important things that it would be great if we can achieve that goal. There's often in the common culture a sense that nonprofits somehow don't like technology or don't use technology. There's probably a little bit of truth to that, but I don't think it has anything to do with that they don't actually like technology or they don't want it. They want to succeed in their mission, and they understand that having access to the right technology and knowing how to use it is an effective way to get there. I think the problem is they often don't have, maybe they don't have the resources, maybe they don't have the capacity, maybe they don't know the right sort of experts who can help integrate it throughout the organization. So that's kind of the thing we're going to try and go over today, and figure out how to best bring that technology, help them bring that technology to improve and help in them achieving their missions. We're going to kick things off here. I've got Vanessa Smith, who is the president of ServiceNow.org, who's going to join me, and we're just going to frame the conversation. We've got a fun conversation today, and we have a panel, and we'll have some Q&A, so think about as we're talking, things you might want to bring up. But Vanessa, can you join me here?
Yeah, thank you, Alan.
Thank you, appreciate it. All right. Well, thanks for joining. Can you start by just talking a bit about what ServiceNow.org is?
Absolutely. So first, thank you all for joining us this Wednesday morning. I asked my colleague sitting next to me, does this represent the beginning, the middle, or the end of your week? And he said, oh, that's complicated. But I really appreciate you all showing up this morning. ServiceNow.org is a business unit that ServiceNow, we're a workflow automation AI platform, formed about 3 years ago to bring our technology at scale to the nonprofit community. And as a result of that, we truly believe, Alan, as you teed up at the beginning, that nonprofits deserve the same level of digital transformation and AI automation that the commercial sector has enjoyed over the last, many, many years. And so we're laser focused here at ServiceNow.org to bring that technology, again, at scale to the nonprofit and NGO community.
It's fascinating. So you're part of the business, but you're trying to make sure these organizations are effective in their work. How are you doing that? Like, what specifically are you doing what do you feel? And I always hate to say what do nonprofits need, because that's not really the right framing, but how can you help nonprofits in achieving their mission?
A great question. Look, as you teed up, historically nonprofits have not had the same access to digital skills or funding needed to be leading edge in digital transformation and AI. So when we formed ServiceNow.org, it was really critical to focus uniquely on nonprofits as a market segment, and given those restrictions. So what we did, and I know many other tech companies have similar programs and approaches. Number one, we said, let's not treat nonprofits just like every other customer. So we formed a team. I've got a team underneath me who are digital transformation experts experts in the nonprofit industry, and they wake up every day. All of their accounts, all of their customers, all of their markets are nonprofits, and so they're specifically thinking about those unique needs. So that was number one. The second was many nonprofits, the reason why they haven't been able to adopt technology at scale is because of the total cost of ownership. Many tech companies in the past have, what I'd say, thrown free licenses over the wall and said, good luck with these 10 free licenses, right? Do what you'd like. To be able to effectively deploy, run, and get the efficiency and effectiveness gains from technology, we need to think about the end-to-end ecosystem. So we brought together our partners who implement the software and had a philanthropic mindset to offer lower prices and even some pro bono services to get those nonprofits up and running on our platform. And then we thought about how do we embed the skills needed to run and maintain an AI platform within a nonprofit context. So we launched something called ServiceNow University, and that has democratized and provided free AI training and, frankly, broader technology training for free to the nonprofit and the entire ServiceNow and technology community to build those skills in. And then last but not least, we launched a grant program where the bar was too high for certain nonprofits to really get on the digital transformation and AI journey. We offered not only free licenses, but services and a cash grant to get them on the on-ramp to digital transformation. So those are just a few things that we're doing, but there's so much more, and we're just on the beginning of the journey.
And we all know that even sometimes licenses you pay for, you look at after the first year subscription and say, wait, I didn't use that thing because I don't know how to use that thing. So that the access to the knowledge base is so important as well. You mentioned AI. You can't do a conference in 2025 without talking about AI. But AI is often sort of framed as about efficiency and productivity, and that's all great. But how can we also make it so it's about sustainability and like equity and just to really help nonprofits with their mission? Because of course they want to be efficient and productive, but they also need to support their mission.
So look, I'm going to talk about the equity part of AI, but I do want to emphasize that efficiency is important. It's important in the commercial sector, it's important in the nonprofit sector, and that is an area that we've seen some great gains in these kind of early stages of AI adoption. We did a study of, I think, over 300 nonprofits, and we found that about 20% of them were considered pace setters in AI adoption, and we found that they were achieving 20% or more of productivity benefits from adopting AI and digital transformation. And in this day and age of nonprofits needing to do more with less, driving those productivity gains and allowing your workers to free their time up to do more mission critical work is more important than ever. So you can put a pin on AI for efficiency, but that's how we've seen many nonprofits get on that on-ramp to playing with AI as a technology for good. But as nonprofits who many times are serving the most vulnerable populations, equity is a non-negotiable. So I want to give you kind of an example of that question around how are we designing equity into our AI systems and platforms. I'm going to use this example around a story about curb cuts. Maybe some of you have heard this concept. So you guys know what a curb cut is. If you're in a city and there's a sidewalk, they build in the ramps so you can more easily at intersections get through your way and passage. Those curb cuts in the sidewalks were built as a result of city planning for disabled folks who are in wheelchairs to be able to more ably navigate the city streets. But as a result, everybody benefits from those curb cuts. We've all been in New York with our luggage. If you're a parent, you've got a stroller. So something was originally designed with equity in mind for the disabled community, for wheelchairs, now benefits everyone. Think about that with closed captions.
Unless there's a big rainstorm, and then everyone messes up their shoes, but yes.
Exactly. Closed captions, right, originally designed for the deaf community to be able to take advantage of digital screens, and now we all benefit. I don't know about you, when I'm watching Netflix, most of the time I have those closed captions on. So the idea is, how do we use and build equity in as a design principle to AI? The way I see companies doing that effectively is through three things. One, ensuring access to AI for nonprofits. And as we know, especially when you're in developing countries, that's not just the AI platform, but how do we make sure that there's the infrastructure, the power grid, the connectivity. So access is number one. Second is training, how to use AI effectively. And then last but not least is governance. Governance in terms of ensuring there's not bias built, but I think about governance when it comes to equity and AI of having a seat at the table. These large language models that are powering AI systems, we need to make sure that the data and the information from underserved populations are included in those large language models, of course without bias. And I just give an example in women's health. We're 50% of the population, but for many, many years, heart disease studies excluded women. How do we make sure, from a governance perspective, that as these AI models evolve, that data from underserved populations are included in these LLMs so that they're driving and powering this decision-making that's going to be automated and agentic in the future?
And that's an important question. I guess I'll turn it back on you. Like, how do we create partnerships to do this? Like, what are the kind of the partnerships that are out there? I know you all are trying, but you obviously can't do it alone. Like, what are some of these partnerships that can be created? How can governments work with the NGO sector or civil society to make sure this happens? Do you have any recommendations from your work?
Well, I'd say there's three things, and some of it is basic. Number one is convening. Bringing in places and spaces, like obviously we're here for UNGA Week, but to have that deep dialogue, that listening, and having that inclusive seat at the table for nonprofits, the private sector, the public sector coming together. Last Friday in our offices here in Hudson Yards at ServiceNow, we had something called the AI Youth Summit. We brought together Comic Relief, who had a Youth AI Advisory Council, who did research on AI adoption in the youth population, Technovation, which is an organization that's bringing AI at scale to the NGO community. ServiceNow and others came together to talk about AI adoption in the youth age and Generation X. So just convening the right places, spaces, and voices together to talk about fears, talk about opportunities and challenges is number one. We need to listen to each other. The second is the role of government. And, regardless of your politics, et cetera, ServiceNow, as many tech companies, has signed on to something called the White House AI Action Plan. And that's convening all the big tech leaders, public and private sector, and NGOs to make commitments to skilling the workforce of the future to be ready for AI. As part of that, ServiceNow is committed to train and skill over 3 million people by 2027 on AI skills. So there's convening, there's action, and then last but not least, developing end-to-end systems in coalition to address and drive adoption of AI into communities. And I'll give one quick example of that. Idris Elba, the actor, humanitarian, is our brand ambassador for ServiceNow. So we got into partnership with him and his Elba Foundation, which is bringing healthcare, education, services to the continent of Africa. Through the Elba Hope Foundation, through ServiceNow and our technology partnership, Microsoft for infrastructure, and Give Power, which is bringing clean energy and water to underserved communities in Africa. We are focused on several countries bringing AI adoption through coalition and thinking about everything from infrastructure to technology through training. And I think those coalitions that are end-to-end and verticalized are really key to driving impact.
Yeah, for sure. And you've got these two massive sort of societal shifts right now. You've got this massive landscape in the this massive shift in the philanthropic landscape. At the same time, is probably an even bigger shift in the technology landscape. And it's so important to think about how to bring these two together to make it so the former can really benefit from the latter. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I'm going to ask you to stay up here, actually. We're going to expand the conversation. I want to we're just going to bring out a couple of more chairs here, if we can do that. All right, so I'll introduce our expanded panel here. We have Mark Fitzgerald. Well, I'll start with Christian here. We have Christian Pennotti. Oh, sorry, do you mind actually going there? And we have from CARE, we have Mark Fitzgerald from KPMG, and obviously we have Vanessa still, and we have Dr. Stewart from Mastercard. And thank you all for joining. Christian, I'm going to start with you. You work for CARE. You run you help run the Digital Impact Hub, or you run or help run, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. And so CARE is one of the larger nonprofit organizations out there. In a lot of ways, you might be able to have more resources to go into this, and yet I'm sure you still have a lot of challenges. What are some of the learnings that you have in trying to adopt technology into your organization, and what advice might you have for others?
Yeah, thanks so much. So CARE is in 100 countries around the world. We work with thousands of local partners, and certainly, I think from that perspective, we're not a local, small, nonprofit organization, right? And yet, even before the current sort of context, it was never the case that we had lots of surplus resources to invest in core services or technology.
Even though you're one of the bigger ones, yeah.
Even though we're one of the bigger ones, right? The focus is obviously, I think like many organizations, constantly on how can we minimize those expenses and maximize the expenses going into programming around the world. And so I think certainly as AI has erupted, our digital team has been working with partners like ServiceNow for quite some time. And I think we've made good progress on some fronts, but it's been really hard to kind of have a cohesive organization-wide strategy around how we're moving all the pieces in thoughtful ways, where we're making investments. And some of that is just about there's so much noise, right? There are so many different solutions that do similar things, and what kind of path dependencies are we creating when we choose one partner over another, or how can we thoughtfully experiment, frankly, with lots of different technology service providers so that we can learn as we go. And I think that's really what we're trying to do is not create too many major downstream dependencies, and really looking at business unit by business unit, what are some of the fundamental problems? And really getting down to conversations with business units about like, what's painful about what you're doing today? And then trying to identify within that, where are there common sense opportunities for AI to make a difference? And working with those teams to develop those solutions really to solve their fundamental problem. And as long as we stay focused on that, I think we've had pretty good success so far.
I sort of opened with this preposition, this proposal, this concept that nonprofits actually really do want to integrate technology into their solutions, effective technology. Is that right?
I mean, it's certainly right for us, and I think it's certainly right for our country teams and our partners. There's a lot of envy, right? We see what's possible, we see what's out there, and very much want to be able to integrate those types of tools and solutions into our work. It's not always within reach financially, and we need to be really thoughtful about where we do make big commitments, because those are going to have consequences for years.
Great. And Mark, I want to move to you next. You run among other things, and Mark and I have known each other for many years, so among other things, Mark, you run the U.S. nonprofit practice, right, at KPMG. So you see across a number of them, and they look to you to help them come up with ideas for how to operate better, including, I'm sure, to some degrees with technology. What do you see as the biggest barriers facing these organizations that you're working with as they try to integrate technology into their processes?
Yeah, thank you, Alan, and thank you to Devex and ServiceNow for putting this together. I promise I will answer your question, but let me zoom out and put things into context first. I think what we have to consider is there is a mosaic of purpose-led organizations that are grappling with all these questions. So if you look at governments, you look at international organizations like the UN, you have NGOs like CARE, you even have corporate foundations like is represented here. And they are all different shapes and sizes. Some implement their own programs, their own mission. Some partner with others. Some have different tech stacks that they have built up over many, many decades, and so on and so forth. To put that into context, let me give you a sneak peek of something that KPMG will launch in a couple of weeks' time. Every year we do a CEO survey, so this is of corporates, but of the top 5 issues that those CEOs are reporting, 2 relate to technology. One is about investment. There is a clear acceleration of investment. We now have companies in the trillions in terms of market capitalization, but it's not enough. And then secondly, the war for talent is also seen as a great opportunity for some, but also an impediment to seizing the opportunity and benefits of technology, in particular AI. So if corporates of huge size and means are dealing with those issues, you can imagine what governments are going through. So to answer your specific question, Alan, what we're all hearing this week, one, regulation. It is very murky. It's unclear. It is underdeveloped. Who sets regulation, how that's done, who you're doing it with, and the impact for that when you are operating in one country or cross countries. Everyone has to grapple with that, whether you're purpose-led or profit-led. Secondly, talent. We have people who understand technology generally, but the true future use of agentic AI is a relatively small pool. So who is accessing that talent? Because that talent will shape regulation and vice versa. And then third would be what Vanessa's already talked about. You have different phases of technology engagement. One is access. The World Bank recently have published a lot of data around the digital divide 15 years ago was all about accessing this cute little thing called the World Wide Web. And how did you create a modem and kind of dial up to access the web? Now that's largely been dealt with smartphones, but it's the quality and the connectivity of those smartphones which is unequal. It's very varied depending on the countries and the theaters you're operating in. Then you have implementation. You also have absorption rate. Every one of us is dealing with that. I'm still at the basic phase of using GPT. Others are far, far more advanced. So there's a cultural shift as much as there is a technology shift. So when you put all of that together and you apply it primarily to purpose-led organizations, my one piece of advice is nobody has all the answers. Everyone is struggling with the same issues, but it is probably exaggerated with nonprofits because of the issues that Christian has made with respect to access to resources. But there are organizations out there that will partner with you to support you with this journey.
The other amazing thing is, I'm sort of probably in a similar place where I use Gemini, but I happen to use it pretty much every day, but at a pretty basic level, like helping me write emails and such. And every few months, I notice dramatic improvements of where it is. So you can implement a technology today, and that doesn't mean much in 6 months. So you've got to keep up on it. And Uyi, I'll ask you about this part because the technology is important. But for those of you that don't know, the Center for Inclusive Growth is a really cool thing that Mastercard does, and you're helping a lot of these organizations complete their missions. So what do you see as important in terms of beyond the technology? Like, what do you see as important for them to succeed?
Thank you, Alan. That's a loaded question. The challenges that nonprofits face are systemic. And so one size can and should not fit all. So technology needs a few things, at least in my experience, and that's what we're trying to do at the center. One, training, talent. And talent and training has to be both synchronous and asynchronous. Second, technology needs a community of practice to enable those who are trained to become proficient. And within that community of practice, you need to identify internal champions because people learn from each other. And so champions become leaders to almost like a train-the-trainer model. There is excessive supply right now in terms of training, and no one is thinking about the demand side. And suddenly, very soon, there's going to be a glut in the market where everyone is trained, but there are no jobs. How are we intentionally thinking about that inclusive dimension of the demand generation for those that are being trained? And then to just wrap it up is we got to start thinking about partnership at scale. And the way we think about that is what we call experiential learning, where we insert folks, whether it's in government or in ServiceNow, where they implement learning by doing. Those are a few variables that will complement technology. Otherwise, it's vacuous.
I'd love to build on that the supply and demand imbalance. I think it's real, and I'd love to say I had the answer, but to build on your point, what's happening is there are a glut of training programs because everybody in the workforce sees AI as the future. There was a study that showed that if you're looking for a job, 70% of employers, if you don't have AI skills on your resume, will pass you by. So those signals in the market are out there, but they're not converting necessarily into full-time jobs. We launched something called Rise Up about a year ago to bring training at scale to underserved populations, to have those experiences on the resume. But we have also added an apprenticeship piece of that where how can I learn by doing, matching up these folks coming through the training program into apprenticeships with organizations, nonprofits or otherwise. But converting that to full-time roles where you're getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, that's definitely been a challenge. So I think I'm just doubling down on your point that supply and demand imbalance is yet to be, that gap is yet to be closed.
Can I double down on this? So we're working with ServiceNow through our foundation with respect to their focus on youth and education. And what we found, particularly in Africa, is when you give the cohort the opportunity, the access to those tools, their absorption rate is really high. They're digitally native. We have spoken about just that natural demographic dividend that Africa has because of its youth many times. So I've found that when we work with those kind of populations in Africa, they say, yep, I understand the access to the tool, and I immediately come up with use cases. That scale and acceleration is actually faster there than it is here within our professional ranks. So I think there's a degree of cultural absorption which is at play here. So it's not a either or, it's an and. And we just need to create those opportunities for those use cases to flourish.
I love this kind of panel where I don't have to do anything. So.
We're trying to make your job easy. But just maybe, so to pick up on that, I think one of the things that we've been thinking about a lot, and sort of all of us are sitting here, and we have tools that do a lot of the things we're trying to do today, right? So we can write an email more efficiently, maybe. We can create content more efficiently. But we're sort of displacing capabilities and capacities that maybe we have, and with that, I think probably for many of us comes a load of fear about who's going to figure out how to do it faster, right? And I think in a lot of the contexts where we work, including contexts you're mentioning, Mark, I had a colleague when blockchain and crypto were emerging as kind of like the thing, right? Which is coming back around. But I had a colleague in Lebanon who said to me, "You don't understand crypto because you don't need it." He's like, come to Lebanon, see my banking system, and you will instantly understand the utility of this technology to help me accomplish my goals. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in sort of the just explosion of energy and investment of time and resources across the global south, where you're not necessarily displacing some legacy roles or some legacy jobs. You're creating new opportunities in a very different way. And so I think that's an exciting dimension of what's going on. I'll just take 1 second to also acknowledge, I think someone mentioned at the onset, digital inclusion, Mark, and it's correct. Connectivity is theoretically within reach of almost everyone on the planet, and yet in rural Africa, 23% of people have ever been online. And so some of this conversation is still very much about how do you drive fundamental access to the basic tools necessary to participate in or benefit from a lot of this. So.
Yeah, and it's amazing, to your point, things like digital wallets for distributing funds to refugees is just these things are so important, and things that I think, again, these organizations, these purpose-driven organizations, nonprofit organizations, they're in it to do it. And once they understand and these tools become widespread and everyone is on board with helping to integrate them into their operations, they'll really benefit from those. Mark, what do you see? What do you see as a lot of this is going to be to really get this to scale? It's going to require money and financing. And what do you see as some of the most promising ways to make it so that purpose-driven organizations, nonprofits, can have access to these tools? And what do you see as the most promising ways to scale sort of digital inclusion, ensuring that all organizations have access to these benefits?
Yeah, I think we need to start with the intent. What is digital there to do? And particularly when we look at agentic AI, what can it achieve for us? Whether you're purpose-led or profit-led, you've got to start with the ultimate outcome. There are a lot of concerns around what AI, and particularly agentic AI, could do for nefarious reasons, and we've heard, I'm sure many of you have been at events all week on that kind of dark side. But if we look at the positive elements and benefits, let me take an example. It was a speaker you had here yesterday, Alan, from UNHCR, Kelly. And there's a very clear focus there around putting a digital footprint on each individual refugee or migrant that they're responsible for. Now, a cynic could say you are controlling that population, but if you look at the benefits of a digital ID and then putting that on a platform, they call it digital gateway, it creates opportunity for them to engage with whatever community they find themselves in. It's a way for them to be seen in this modern world. So you have to understand what the world around you and the intent of what UNHCR want to do. Yes, they're going to be more efficient and more effective about what they want to achieve by using technology, but it's also the citizen, the refugee, about how they engage with the modern world in an environment that is new to them. So how does that work in a way that will protect their ownership? So Vanessa, the last point I'll make, Alan, is on data. None of this works without data clarity, data accuracy, data governance, data ownership. There's a whole raft of reasons around data. Technology is only as good as what you feed it. So if you feed it in correctly at the front end and you have absolute clarity of the intent on the other end, then the use cases will present themselves.
Yeah, and I want to go to you on that because there's so much concern about this issue, and I think it's rightly held concern about what is the data going in. The data coming out is only as good as the data going in. So how do we make sure the data going in is good and transparent and equitable? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about how to best do that.
Don't get me started on the. That's what I sleep thinking about. Wake up. There is so much. The inequity in our world is stark, and AI is even further exacerbating it. Right, and it scares me what tomorrow looks like for those who are excluded. And I'm talking about a third of the world, right? Africa has come up a few times. Let's just zero in on Africa, right? Between 2,000 to 3,000 languages, about 98% of them are undigitized, which means that these languages are not available online and therefore are cut out from whatever we are talking about now. And there's no one really thinking about how do we solve that fundamental problem of digitization. Can I just get off the inequity thing? I want to respond to agentic AI because I have a visceral reaction to agentic AI from the perspective of nonprofits. We need to make a distinction between AI agents and agentic AI. I don't think nonprofits are ready to take on systems that are autonomous in decision making. They need systems that enable decision support. So we need to switch our perspective, therefore. And I think, Christian, you talked about it. We have to think about problem-centric approach when it comes to nonprofits. You know, I talked about it. They're on the front lines dealing with serious challenges. AI agents, cool. But nonprofits are not ready to cede autonomous decision-making to AI. But they are looking for technology to enable them to make smart decisions. How can they do more with less? That's AI agents. And you don't need a ton of data for that, and you don't need a large language model. In fact, you need a small language model, and therefore you address the inequity that comes with compute power.
That's great. I love the passion, and Uyi used to work for data.org, so I'm sure can talk to anyone for a long time about this. Christian, so going back to you on the, is that one of the barriers? Is it that for NGOs, for nonprofits to integrate these into their actions, is what's being presented just not really what they like? Is there a bit of a mismatch between what's out there and what's needed, or what do you think the biggest barriers are to integration?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know that it's so much that there's a mismatch between what's out there and what's needed. I think one, obviously teams are thin, and so expertise is thin. And so having the right expertise to help you make thoughtful decisions about that exact issue, right? You go to most people in the C-suite of probably most large organizations, and you say agentic versus agents, do you know the difference, right? Do we need huge large language models in order to accomplish this small problem? And I think so there's some work to be done there, just in terms of understanding what actually is right fit for purpose for what we're trying to accomplish. I think the idea of human in the loop in terms of the decision-making function is fundamental and probably a much more comfortable space to lean into. And then we're seeing, there are parts of our business, like the marketing team, right? They're doing all sorts of stuff. It's really low-risk stuff. They're not automating things entirely, right? But it's also about, I think, listening to and finding those internal champions, internal innovators, and think about how do you tap into that ambition and that energy and create some guardrails that allow experimentation. But I think a lot of the challenge right now is really just understanding some of those fundamental differences between these different options that are available, what it takes to be successful, what's the total cost of ownership, as Vanessa mentioned, and really getting your head wrapped around that.
You want to add to that, Vanessa?
No, your passion and your response, was sparking some thoughts here during the conversation around that on-ramp to adopting AI and all forms of AI. I just want to double down on that idea that for the NGO and purpose-driven community, getting started is key. There's studies out there that 60%, and this was like 6 months ago, of purpose-driven organizations are adopting AI in some way, shape, or form, and that's great. I think that number's probably up to 75% or more now. There are the low-risk ways, like simply using ChatGPT, Gemini, and bringing that to your employees and staff and volunteers in a safe way. Then we move to generative AI, which, again, very low-risk ways to do that, maybe with small language models. For example, ServiceNow, we do service management. We help you service your employees, your volunteers, and constituents and beneficiaries out there in the field. We've seen agentic AI in that area be very effective. You have an agent that can help you reset your password, and they're autonomous in that now they can actually not just tell you how to reset your password, but they do it for you. Perhaps that's an example of a lower risk area where agentic AI can be adopted. But as we move to your point on the risk around autonomous action in more high-risk areas, I think that's where you see the fear and you see the risk coming in these convenings about what are the right use cases, human-driven use cases to adopt real autonomous agentic AI. I have not seen that at scale yet in the NGO community, but I will give one example that I think ServiceNow, and we're really proud of. We just partnered with the UNOS, the United Network for Organ Sharing. They do and manage the whole process of organ transplants I think here in the United States, and they just went live on the ServiceNow platform to do all of the intake and tracking for transplant recipients and where those organs are coming in. And they've been able to use simple digitization and basic generative AI to really fuel that process. Now, would I be really scared and be really risky if they took that to the point where a machine is deciding who gets what organ and where it goes? And I think that's just illustrative of the various adoption curves of AI. But the key takeaway for NGOs and purpose-led organizations in the room, getting started on the path is key. And building those skills both internally and with partners so that you can see your tolerance risk to get the benefits of AI.
Alan, can I just pick up on that fear kind of concern? Look, I have a fear about giving agentic AI my personal credit card because it can go out and buy whatever it thinks I want or need. So it starts at that level, but it also elevates, joking aside, up to these serious issues we're talking about. But one thing purpose-led organizations have always been really excellent at is scenario planning. You prepare, you plan for those events, acute or otherwise, that will inevitably happen in our societies, and you respond to those acute events. That is absolutely one of the key assets of this community. What digitalization can do can help elevate that scenario planning in a safe way if it's managed and planned in a way that's organized. For example, you can create a digital twin and you can plan for a natural disaster. You can look at what potential agentic AI models will produce in those situations without touching or influencing anyone in the real life. So if that's something we can do to make ourselves a little bit more efficient when those acute events actually do happen, that is where we will do a lot more with less.
Yeah, and it really is, I mean, humans have developed a fear response for good reason, and it keeps us alive. So not giving your credit card over is keeping your bank account alive, let's say. And that is a natural reaction, but in some ways we do have to try. Yeah, it feels unnatural, but organizations are going to need to do some of these things that feel unnatural. And Uyi, I just want to, and feel free to pick up on another thread as well, but I do just want to ask you, in terms of the partnerships that might be needed to succeed might feel unnatural, but what are the things that organizations that you've seen do to make them as effective as possible to bring about tech for good sort of solutions?
Thank you, Alan. Just to quickly respond, I think you encouraged us to do this, right? So Mark,
could you just put in the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. I project loud, so I try to put the microphone away from me. But when it comes to the inequities that we find, for example, from algorithmic bias, for some of us, it's real. When these systems make decisions, I actually encountered one in Dubai recently, right? So these things are real when they affect you on a personal basis. And so the fear is not just about entrusting the computer with my credit card. It's more about how it affects me as an individual and the downstream consequences of that. I just wanted to quickly put a button on that. But to answer your question, to go back, prior to data.org, I was at the Gates Foundation, where we started to experiment with models of partnership. And what emerged is this ecosystem where philanthropic organizations sort of see themselves as those capacitated to de-risk NGOs' entry into technology. That initial seed investment to bring NGOs to begin to try technology. And then once it works, the idea was that private sector partners, ServiceNow and others, can come in and complement the work of philanthropic capital by taking it to the next level, proving this technology or proving the case. And then governments come in, not just to regulate in terms of governance, but to start to think about how do you take it to scale? How do you create the business environment for this to flourish? That's kind of the model, the partnership model that we drew up. I don't know if it's ever been implemented, but that's what I will propose here.
Great, thanks for that. And in a minute, we're going to start passing a mic around and open up for questions. So please, start or comments or hopefully questions directed at the panel. But please do start thinking of things. While you're all doing that, I just want to ask you all: is there anything else you wanted to add that you think is maybe like an action item, or what's one thing that we can learn to bring this forward?
Yeah, I'll just make one quick plug, different kind of partnership, but I think just as it's similar to how there's sort of lots of noise and fragmentation in the service side and the supply side. One of the things I think that we can do as purpose-focused organizations is come together and try to create some cost efficiencies and some collaborative opportunities for partners like ServiceNow and others. And so CARE has teamed up with Mercy Corps and Save the Children to do precisely that. So we're having conversations about what have we all tried, what are we all doing in terms of adoption of technology generally and AI specifically, and trying to identify cross-cutting use cases where we can engage with service providers and partners and vendors to look at how can we solve that problem, not just for one organization, but for our organizations plus our partner networks. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in collaborations like that.
That's a great thing to end on, but let's stay here because we have, I just want to move to questions. If you have one, please do just mention your name, and if you're representing the organization, would love to hear that. But anything from the audience? I see a few. Okay, great. I see some hands. The first one I saw is back by that screen there in the middle of the screen.
Thank you so much. My name is Caitlin Kelly. I run a small NGO called Powering Potential that works on increasing digital literacy, digital access, and education resources in Tanzania. There are a lot of ethical issues with the use of AI. And for those of us who work with vulnerable, underserved populations, I think a lot of us are trying to figure out how is AI going to affect the people that we work with? And I think that in terms of the polarization of wealth, that most of the AI tools that are being used most commonly in the world are to the economic benefit of a few very, very large companies. And then also specifically the environmental effects. So maybe if you could speak to how your organizations are thinking about the ethical issues involved here, especially for purpose-driven organizations that are serving, like I said, vulnerable populations, and maybe specifically the environmental piece.
Love the question. Let's take at least one more here, and then we'll get to sort of batch response. And there was another hand I saw, right there by the camera. Great.
Hi, everyone. My name's David McAfee. I'm the co-founder of Viamo. I'd like to thank the panel today for your discussion today. It's an incredibly important topic. My question is actually for Christian. You brought up a really great point about people who are early in their digital journey. About 2.7 billion people on the planet aren't online yet, but many, many of these people began their digital journey with a simple mobile phone. Some then graduate to a smart device, and then some graduate again to actually get online with that smart device. But our company is focused on people who are early in that digital journey and trying to bring this transformational technology down to the level of the people at the very bottom of the economic pyramid. So agents for community health workers and agricultural extension agents and primary school teachers, but then also direct consumer applications to be able to give people the opportunity to ask any question. So I wanted to ask you, from your experience on the ground in so many countries with CARE, what are some examples of how to reach people with this transformative technology, but early in their device journey?
So Christian, you can just answer that if you have a good answer for it, and then we'll get to the sort of panel-wide question here.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So part of the answer is figuring out with Viamo how we do things in communities around the world, so which we are actively doing. I think for us, we've had a commitment, as our colleague in the back mentioned, in terms of just supporting fundamental digital access, digital literacy, digital skills. None of those fundamentals have radically changed in the span of the last 6 months or 12 months, right? In terms of people still are trying to do those fundamental things of just getting online. And so I think what we're trying to do is identify, we've used IVR, we've used SMS, we've used radio. Like, there are all of these traditional technologies, many of which remain highly effective and well fit for purpose for a lot of the people we're working with and a lot of the use cases I think that we see. Figuring out how we can now tap into the opportunity to enable people to ask authentic questions in their native language on a basic phone and get an answer that helps solve their problem, the same way all of us are interacting with a lot of these chatbots, right? I think is a high priority issue. Some of what I think that where we're finding, I think both opportunity and challenge is what is the commercial case for sustaining access to those things. What I'm really exhausted with is, CARE, another organization, getting a grant, doing a partnership, creating access to information for a limited period of time. And then that grant ends, and now that person no longer has access to that platform and that solution. So I think figuring out what the public-private partnerships and what the business models look like for ensuring that if we de-risk at the front end and we figure out how this can work, that it then does scale and flourish, which is what we see in financial services, right? We work with large financial institutions to improve products so they're more inclusive. And once that work is done, those products do scale, right? That's a lot of what we do, in fact, with the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. So I think that's what we're trying to do, is figure out, for us, the biggest constraint isn't so much the technology at this point. It's really how do we ensure that that access to information and service is there long after we are.
And this other question, it's such a huge, important question. I mean, you've got people making, organizations, companies making bucket loads of money from AI, and they're not in the global south right yet. Hopefully at some point they will be, but they're not yet. So how do, and it's a legitimate skepticism, and so how do we make sure that skepticism doesn't hold true?
What I'd add to this conversation is inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. In our opening discussion, Alan, we talked about this concept of curb cuts and the idea of designing for marginalized populations from the beginning. That means convening, being present, the human-centered design, and designing use cases based on business challenges with deep knowledge of the pain point in the communities you're serving. I'll give one quick example of a mistake I'd say we made at ServiceNow.org. We were so excited to support a small nonprofit in Kenya, and we were bringing an app to teachers there to help them share through chat and messaging ways to better teach in the classroom. And so we designed this great user interface, et cetera, and it required those teachers, I went to the village outside of Nairobi, to have an email address and password. And they were like, what? We use WhatsApp. And we did not design a great solution. We understood the pain point once they got into the application of what we needed to provide, but we forgot to listen and design from the beginning. The idea that they're not going to enter a username and password onto the iPad that they have access to for 3 hours a day. They needed to get things pushed through WhatsApp. So inclusion, 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 making equity a design principle from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other?
Yeah, ethics is such a profound challenge right now. We all often ask, especially from the perspective of the Global South, whose ethics are we talking about? And so I agree with Vanessa. It's really how do we bring those communities to be part of the conversation, not just to have a seat at the table, but to have a voice at the table. And there are different dimensions to having a voice at the table. One of them I brought up earlier. If you just, again, go back to Africa, between 2,000 to 3,000 languages. 98% of them are undigitized. Having a voice at the table means that we are intentional in actually solving that fundamental barrier, enabling these communities to have their languages digitized, bring them online. And then we can go from there.
Great. And anything else on that? Okay. Oh.
Last thing I would mention, great question, because it ties in a lot of the same concerns and considerations we've mentioned on the panel around data and the use of data, the governance of data, but particularly the ownership of the data. And we could talk for hours around how that's getting monetized, both locally and globally. But I go back to my earlier point around the need for clarity around regulation. If we don't have a set of a framing by country and also globally, because remember, we love standardization in our community. We kind of forget this. There was a panel the other day about seatbelts or containers on a ship, or a lot of you flew here. There's a lot of standardization in our society. This is one where we do not have standardization yet, and thus it's driven because we don't have regulation. And the last thing I'll mention, Alan, is cyber threats. We have not talked about that. It's very real, it's very present, and it does not matter whether you are in a vulnerable community or you're freely giving away data here in New York. It applies to all of us all the time, and it's getting far more sophisticated daily.
Great, thanks all. I think we have time for one or two more quick ones. I see two hands. Sorry, I can only take the first two hands here. So I see in the black shirt in the back there. And then the second one was over, yes, by the camera behind the last gentleman who asked.
Hi, my name's Corey Hulse. I'm from IACT. And my question is about connectivity, which many of you mentioned. And I'm just curious, kind of getting back to the fundamentals like we were talked over here, before kind of even getting to AI platforms or anything, particularly with our programs in Africa, we struggle so much with our teams just on getting connected to them. So I'm wondering about any solutions you guys work with when you work on connectivity.
Great, connectivity, and let's just get the other question here. We'll do a sort of a quick fire, rapid response.
Yeah, hi, my name is Shubha, and I work in India with Sati. We have developed a solution and transition to the government. So if we do want to scale, I think we need to, as we are transitioning all the services that are discontinued by external aid to the government, we have to engage the government from the beginning. We have to take the ownership. We have to resource them for their own capacity for developing and taking over these services, and also for regulation. I think without that, all of these pilots will remain pilots, and we will not be able to transition onto the scale.
So important. I think both of these are really important. Connectivity is really the basis of access to technology, and of course, without buy-in from governments, local, national, et cetera, you can't get the regulatory regimes you need to have effective technology utilization. So any answers on either of those?
Yes to both. Connectivity is a big issue, right? And I think it came up in the panel. We have to localize and adapt to the environment. If WhatsApp is what is relevant, let's not come in with other ideas of what connectivity would look like. So I think we need to sort of advance in the spirit of localism and have a connected world based on what exists in those environments.
And I'd just say it's kind of a basic response, but it's hard to do, and that's working in coalition. ServiceNow is a tech company. We're not going to solve ourselves issues with connectivity in a remote village in Africa, but for us to help drive our mission of bringing AI and digitization to the world, working in coalition with organizations that do so is key, and I think that continues to be the key challenge. How do we not compete in this world? How do we work together in this end-to-end verticalization from connectivity to the end user experience to drive AI adoption? And those coalitions will be key.
Yeah, the sophistication of connectivity, that gap is getting wider. So is it connected or not? I think we are pretty much further down the road than we were 10, 15 years ago, but it's the depth of that connectivity which is getting wider. This is such a broad topic that moves into how much energy is driven and generated by different countries, how data centers are changing that dynamic in their own right. And that happens even in states in the US, never mind when we go into emerging markets. So it is a topic that is so broad and so vast in its response, and the complexity is overwhelming at times. But purpose-led organizations have a massive role to play because you're working with these communities daily.
Great. Well, with that, I think we could have a whole event on the role of government in advancing technology. So I don't think we can quite touch on that, but it's such an important theme. I want to thank you all for joining. Vanessa, I want to thank ServiceNow for helping put this on. For everyone else here, we will be starting a great series of our news programming shortly after this, where the focus of this morning is mostly around a lot of the topics we talked about: philanthropy, technology, AI, et cetera. So hope a lot of you stay. But please join me in thanking our panelists, and looking forward to seeing you all.